It was just after 9 in the evening, April 10th, 1912, when the breeze off the Southampton docks carried a kind of calm that didn't quite match the quiet excitement on board. People smiled politely, stewards bustled about with trunks and tags, and somewhere near the stern, a little boy laughed at a seagull chasing its own reflection across the waves. No one knew what would come next. Not the millionaire in first class polishing his cufflinks. Not the coal-stained stoker finishing his fourth shift below deck. And certainly not you. If you were there, even with all your modern know-how, you probably wouldn't have survived the Titanic. Let's not rush, though. Let's take it slow. Let's pretend you're there, watching the ship from the outside at first. The RMS Titanic, all 882 feet of her, is more than just steel and steam. She's the pride of a nation, the latest wonder of the modern world, a floating palace built for dreams and class and illusion. The White Star Line calls her unsinkable. She gleams in the low sunlight like a myth brought to life. And there you are, just a quiet observer on a sleepy dock, trying to keep your collar down in the wind. You're already feeling small next to her. Now, imagine boarding. The gangway creaks a little under your shoes, and for a second, you hesitate. Not out of fear, just something about the hush in the air makes you pause. But the steward with the clipboard smiles, nods, checks your name. Maybe you're third class, maybe second, maybe a guest of someone richer than you'll ever be. Doesn't matter. You walk in. The warmth inside is unexpected. You didn't expect it to smell faintly of beeswax and new carpet. You didn't expect the chandeliers, or the people in gloves, or the curious mix of perfume and pipe smoke and salt air. It's not loud, but there's a hum, a rhythm, like the ship itself has a heartbeat. And in that moment, you might start to believe the papers. She really is the safest ship ever built. You find your way to your quarters. Maybe it's small and wooden with a narrow bed and no window. Maybe it's something fancier, with brass fixtures and a private bath. Either way, you sit for a second, let out a breath, and feel the vibration of the engines under your feet. She's moving now. There's no going back. You might think, with all the documentaries and dramatic music and black and white photos, that you'd have some advantage over everyone else. You've seen the movie, read the books, heard the tales. But what they never tell you is how slow it all felt. How ordinary. If you were on the Titanic, you wouldn't know what was coming. You'd laugh at dinner. You'd stroll the deck. You might flirt with a stranger or stare at the stars until your fingers got too cold. The danger was too far away, hidden in the deep, still asleep. Now you're on day 2, April 11th. The ship stops briefly in Queenstown, Ireland, picking up final passengers and dropping off a few mailbags. Some stand at the railing, waving ashore. Some are crying quietly, saying goodbye to everything they've ever known. You watch. You don't know why, but you feel something in your gut twist a little. It passes. Later, you sit near the stern where the steerage passengers laugh louder than the rest. There's music, simple and fast, from a fiddle played by someone who doesn't look like they have much, but sure knows how to pull joy from strings. Kids are running in circles. A man offers you bread he baked fresh that morning, still warm from the galley ovens. You thank him, even though you're not really hungry. That night, the stars come out. There are no city lights here, just sea, sky, and a ship cutting clean through the dark. The Atlantic seems too wide, too calm. You lean over the railing a little, just to see how far down it goes. It's farther than you imagined. You pull back fast. There's a girl nearby. Maybe she's 6 or 7, swinging her legs from a bench. She smiles at you like you're part of the ship now, like you belong here. It's comforting, in a way, that a stranger sees you as part of the rhythm. Another day, another calm stretch of sea. You wake to the smell of toast and coal smoke. There's chatter in the hallway. Someone's lost a hat. Someone else found a photograph from home tucked in their coat pocket. You hear music playing upstairs, a soft waltz drifting down the stairwell like a ghost with perfect timing. You take a walk. You pass a man with a mustache who smells like gin and tobacco. He nods politely. A woman in blue lace clutches her pearls, clearly trying not to trip on the floor-length dress that someone probably made her wear. Everyone seems caught between roles. Gentlemen pretending not to be nervous, stewards pretending not to be tired, you pretending you know what to do if anything went wrong. But nothing has gone wrong yet. Then it's Sunday, April 14th. You'd think something would feel different, that there would be tension in the air or a shadow cast across the sun. But it's just another quiet day. There's church in the morning for those who want it. Afternoon tea for those who don't. The engines hum steadily. A steward jokes with a boy about hiding stowaways in suitcases. Somewhere near the Marconi room, a wireless operator sends out messages to ships you've never heard of. You don't pay attention. You're too busy watching the sea. By evening, it's colder than usual. Your breath starts to show in little clouds as you walk the upper deck. You shiver and pull your collar tighter. A couple nearby talks about icebergs. You glance at the water. It still looks like nothing. Just miles of empty dark. A steward walks by, rubbing his hands. Going to be a cold one, he mutters. You nod, but you're not really listening. Dinner smells rich tonight. Roast duck, maybe, or a stew with too many spices for a simple meal. Somewhere, a band plays just loud enough to feel like wallpaper. No one seems concerned. Why would they be? The ship is massive. Steel. Unbreakable. You go to sleep thinking about how quiet the ocean sounds when you close your eyes. And then, in the middle of the night, something shifts. It's not loud. Not a bang. Not an explosion. Just a dull scrape. A long sigh of steel against ice. You sit up confused. The engine's slow. Stop. The hum you'd gotten used to gone. Replaced by silence. And that silence is what wakes people. That, and the faint sound of voices rising above the hallway floorboards. You open the door. A man in a vest is standing in the hallway, looking toward the bow. Another cabin opens down the hall. Then another. A steward appears, calm but firm. Everything's all right. Just a precaution. You're told to stay in your room. So you do, but you can't help it. You step out. The hallway feels colder now. The floor seems to tilt slightly, but maybe it's your imagination. A woman in a silk robe asks someone what's happening. No one really knows. Up on deck, the stars are still out. Too bright for something so quiet. You see a man pointing at something in the water. Ice. A piece floating just past the starboard side. Another crewman is walking fast now, toward the bridge. People begin to whisper, then louder, then move. In first class, a gentleman asks for brandy. In steerage, someone starts praying softly in a language you don't know. You notice that some of the lifeboats have covers on them. Others are still tied up tightly. The davits look complicated. You realize something that chills your spine more than the wind ever could. You don't know how any of this works. You don't know where your life jacket is. You don't know how many lifeboats there are. You don't know which way to go if the ship starts a list. You don't know who to trust. And even if you did, there wouldn't be enough time. A bell rings somewhere. A crew member yells something you can't make out. You feel a deep, low groan through the floorboards. Not a sound, a feeling, like the ship is realizing, too late, that she's not invincible. Now people are being told to dress warmly and come to the boat deck. Some laugh. Others obey. A few argue. You stand frozen for a moment, staring at the lifeboat nearest you, thinking it looks too small. Thinking you'll wait. Thinking it can't really be that bad. But deep down you feel it. The calm is gone. And still, the band plays. And still, the stars shine. And still, you haven't decided what to do. Because you weren't prepared. Because you trusted the steel and the stories. Because, even now, part of you still believes they'll fix it. That this isn't how it ends. But it's colder now. The tilt is worse. The lifeboats are filling. Some won't come back. And you're still standing there. Waiting. Hoping. Unaware that the moment to act is almost gone. A woman's voice drifts across the deck. They said this ship couldn't sink. It's quiet, like she's trying to believe it, even as she says it out loud. You don't recognize her, but her words settle into your chest like a pebble in deep water, barely noticeable at first, but spreading little ripples that won't go away. The cold air stings your ears now. Your hands are stiff. You start to walk toward the main staircase, not sure what you're looking for. People are gathering, but it's not panic yet. It's confusion, curiosity. Only a few seem to understand how serious this is, and they're moving quickly, faces set, eyes scanning for exits. You pass a steward near the top of the stairs. His smile is thinner than before. He tells you again, It's just a precaution. Please return to your quarters." But now his voice has a crack in it. His hand trembles as he straightens his cap. He doesn't believe himself anymore, and that's more unsettling than anything. Farther down the corridor, someone's crying. Not loud, just a soft, helpless sound from behind a closed door. Maybe they know, or maybe they just feel it. You head toward your cabin, but stop when you see a group gathering near one of the lifeboats. The crew is lowering the covers. Ropes creak. A few passengers begin to climb in, reluctantly. Some are laughing nervously. One man asks if they're really doing a drill in the middle of the night. No one answers. You glance over the edge of the ship. The water is still. Too still. It reflects the stars perfectly, as if the sea isn't moving at all. That, somehow, is the most eerie thing of all. The Atlantic has gone quiet, like it's holding its breath. More people are appearing now. Families clutching bags, women wrapping coats around children. The upper decks are fuller. The chatter grows. Some demand answers. Others just want direction. Everyone's looking for someone who knows what to do. You keep walking, heart beginning to tap faster behind your ribs. You tell yourself it's probably nothing, but you're not sure you believe it either. You look down and realize you're still in your nightshirt. You hadn't meant to leave your cabin for more than a minute. You turn around. The floor tilts again. You steady yourself against the wall, and that's when it hits you. It's not your imagination. The ship is leaning ever so slightly forward, just a degree or two. Enough to feel wrong. Enough to make your legs notice. At your door, you grab your coat. It's not very warm, but it's something. You search your drawers for a life jacket. It takes longer than you expect. Everything feels slower now, even your fingers. When you finally find the bulky white vest, you stare at it for a moment, as if hoping it'll tell you what to do next. The voice in your head says, "This is just a precaution." But another voice, quieter and much more serious, says, "No, this is real." You head back out. The hallway is busier now. More people are dressed, more doors open. Children cling to their parents, tired and confused. A man in a long coat is shouting for someone named Margaret. You keep moving. At the boat deck, the mood has shifted again. Not panic yet, but tension like a held breath. A lifeboat creaks as it's lowered. You see the fear in the eyes of the woman inside it. She's holding a baby, wrapped in a blanket, but her lips are trembling. She doesn't say anything as the boat begins its slow descent into the dark. Another crewman yells, "Women and children first," but some of the men protest. "My wife can't go alone," one shouts. "I'll just help her in, that's all." But the officers are firm. Some carry guns now, not pointed at anyone, but visible, just enough to make people think twice. You spot a young couple nearby, maybe newlyweds. The woman is begging her husband to get in with her. He shakes his head. "Go," he says. "I'll follow on the next boat." You know he won't. She knows it too, but she nods anyway and steps into the lifeboat. You stand there, frozen, trying to decide what kind of person you'd be. The kind who gets in early? The kind who waits? The kind who gives up their spot? Or the kind who insists on surviving? And all the while, the ship groans softly beneath your feet. Somewhere below, deep in the hull, water is creeping into the corridors. It's silent, relentless, hidden. You head to the opposite side of the deck. There are fewer people here. Another lifeboat is half full. A steward waves you over. "This one's leaving soon," he calls. You hesitate. It doesn't look full. You could fit, easily, but something keeps your feet planted. "Are you coming?" he shouts again, a little more urgent now. You don't answer. Instead, you look up. The sky is too beautiful for this moment. Stars like diamonds scattered across velvet. Cold, distant, uncaring. It doesn't make sense. It never will. The boat lowers slowly. You watch it go, the ropes squeaking in rhythm with your pulse. It vanishes below the rail. And then the moment's gone. You missed your chance. You stay there for a moment longer, the chill creeping into your chest like water into steel. You should move. Find another boat. Go below. Something. Anything. But you don't. Because now, for the first time, you really understand what this is. This isn't a drill. This isn't just another inconvenience. This is history happening, and you're in it. Only you're not the survivor in the story. You're the quiet detail. The name on a list. The forgotten voice in a dark hallway. And the clock is ticking. because down below, the Atlantic is climbing. Steady, hungry, inevitable, and you, like so many others that night, are still trying to decide what to do. You finally step away from the railing, your fingers stiff from gripping the cold metal. Every part of you wants to believe this isn't happening, that this grand, elegant ship, this floating city that everyone said was unsinkable, could really go under. It still doesn't feel real. The lights are still glowing. The music from the first-class lounge still drifts faintly through the air. Somewhere a violin is playing. The crew is working faster now. More lifeboats are being uncovered, their ropes unwound by hands that tremble even when they try not to. Orders are being given more firmly. Voices carry over the deck, sharp and clipped, but people are still confused. Some think it's safer to stay on board. Some think they have time. You pass a man arguing with an officer. There's room on that boat, he insists, pointing. You're not lowering it half empty. That's madness. The officer doesn't budge. Women and children only, he replies, his voice flat. The man backs away, his eyes wild, hands shaking. He doesn't know whether to shout or cry. It's then you notice something strange. The angle of the ship is changing. Slightly, but enough. The bow, what used to feel level, now tilts just a little more forward. You didn't feel it shift, but your feet know the difference. The pitch is off. The tilt is growing. You begin to wonder, how long does a ship like this take to sink? And more frightening, what does it feel like when it does? You walk past a group of children sitting on a bench. Their mother is tying scarves around their necks, her face tight with worry but her voice soothing. We're going for a little boat ride, she says gently, brushing a girl's hair behind her ear. Won't that be fun? The children nod, too tired or too young to understand the weight in her voice. The line near the lifeboats is longer now. Women step in, some looking back over their shoulders, some refusing to leave without their husbands. Some are crying. Others stare blankly into the dark, as if trying to see what lies ahead. One boy clutches a small stuffed rabbit. His father kneels beside him, whispering something into his ear. Then the father stands back, his hands trembling, and the boy is passed into the boat. The father doesn't follow. You move on, past the railings and lifeboats, into the ship again. Inside, the lights feel too warm, too calm. But the energy has shifted. People move faster now, hurrying through hallways. There are questions in every face. What's happening? Are we sinking? Is it too late? You feel the ship beneath you, groaning. Not loudly, but you can feel in your bones. The way the floor shifts when you walk. The way the windows hum under pressure. Water is forcing its way into places it should never be. And the Titanic, this giant, proud vessel, is groaning under the weight of it. You pass the dining room. Some tables are still set, as if dinner might continue. As if this were all a strange intermission. A waiter stands near the door, clutching a folded napkin. He doesn't say anything as you pass. He just watches you, eyes vacant. You hear a woman sobbing down the corridor. Not loud, not wild. Just soft, continuous sobbing, like a leak in a pipe, steady and hopeless. She's sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, hands over her mouth. Her suitcase lies open beside her, clothes spilling out like she tried to pack, but forgot what to bring. You don't know what to say, so you keep walking. There's a mirror in the hallway. You glance at your reflection and barely recognize yourself. You look pale, hollow-eyed, like a person watching something too big to understand. Farther below, you hear something metallic, like something snapping. It echoes faintly through the walls, and a few people pause, looking around. No one says anything. Everyone hears it. Everyone pretends they didn't. You head down a flight of stairs. Against your better judgment. You want to see. Maybe part of you wants to help. Or maybe you just can't stand not knowing. The carpet is damp now, and you freeze. That's not right. You kneel and touch it. Cold. Definitely wet. You keep going. On the lower level, you start to hear the water. It's not rushing, not yet. It's rising. Creeping. The kind of slow sound that makes your heart race more than a scream ever could. You reach a hallway and see the water glistening at the far end, about ankle deep. It's silent, except for the occasional bubble or soft splash. A steward wades through it, holding his lantern high. You need to get up to the boat deck, he says when he sees you. Now. You nod and back away. The water shines in the yellow light like liquid glass. You climb back up quickly, your legs heavy, the cold clinging to your skin. When you reach the top again, the ship groans louder. Not dramatic, just steady, dull, like the sound of an old tree bending. You return to the lifeboat deck. The crowd is larger, the noise louder. Some voices are raised. One man is shouting at an officer. Another is begging to be allowed on board. An old woman clutches her husband's coat, refusing to let go. There's a crackle from the upper cables. One lifeboat swings awkwardly as it lowers. A child screams. The crowd jerks back, fear spreading like smoke. But the boat steadies and continues downward, rocking slightly in the air like a cradle on a string. The Titanic is slanting now. You can feel it. Your body keeps adjusting for it. You walk uphill as you head aft. It's undeniable now, and terrifying. One young man stares at the stars above, then at the water below. There's no land out there, he murmurs. Just miles of black water. You look too, and realize he's right. There's nothing. Just the sea. Just the dark. Another group of passengers is lowering themselves into a boat. You recognize the young couple from earlier. This time, she's refusing to go without him. He finally relents. They both climb in. Maybe they'll be lucky. Maybe they'll make it. But not everyone will. There's still so many people on board. So many lifeboats already gone. And only so much time. You find yourself near the back of the ship now, surrounded by people who have chosen to wait. Maybe they're hoping for a miracle. Maybe they're in denial. Or maybe, like you, they just don't know what to do anymore. A man next to you lights a cigarette with shaky hands. Well, he says softly, so much for the unsinkable ship. You don't reply, because what is there to say? The music starts again, soft and solemn. The band is still playing. Somehow, that's the most heartbreaking part. They know. Everyone knows. And still they play. The cold bites harder now. The wind stings. The sea is rising. The lights flicker once, and then steady again. But something has changed. You feel it deep in your chest. The Titanic is dying, and you're still on it. Still standing on a ship that was supposed to be impossible to destroy. Still deciding what to do with the time that's left. Still wondering if anyone at all, is coming to save you. You don't know how long you've been standing there. The cold has crept deeper into your coat, into your shoes, into your bones. The wind slices through the folds of your clothes, and even though the stars are still bright and still beautiful, they offer no warmth, no comfort. Someone behind you murmurs a prayer. You can't hear the words, but the rhythm is unmistakable. Soft, repetitive, desperate, like they're trying to hold the world together with the force of their voice alone. The deck tilts again, just a little more, and you hear gasps around you. It's as if the ship is sighing. One long, heavy exhale. A steward stumbles as he tries to rush past, nearly slipping on the damn planks. His cap is gone, and his face is pale with exhaustion. Keep moving toward the lifeboats, he says to no one in particular. But there aren't many left, and even fewer seats. You make your way up the incline, passing more passengers clinging to hope or to each other. Some sit on benches, silent. Others pace in circles, talking to themselves. One man tries to read a newspaper by the light of a lantern. The pages tremble in his hands, but his eyes stay fixed on the print. Maybe pretending it's just another day helps him stay calm. When you reach the starboard side, you see another boat being lowered. This one is nearly full. Children are pressed shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in shawls, hands linked tightly. Their mothers speak gently, trying to smile. Some manage it, some don't. A few feet away, a woman stares over the rail at the black water. She doesn't cry. She doesn't speak. Her hands rest on the railing, knuckles white. Her gaze is fixed, unblinking, like she's already left this world behind. You think about speaking to her, but can't find the words. So many people are doing their best to stay composed. Some talk quietly. Others hum to themselves. But the tension is everywhere now. Thick in the air, in the way people look over their shoulders, in the way they flinch at every strange creak of the ship. Below deck, the situation must be worse. You haven't gone back down, Not after seeing the rising water, but you can feel it spreading, pressing upward, inch by inch. Unstoppable. Somewhere someone coughs. Another person slips and falls, but gets up quickly, brushing themselves off with trembling hands. An older gentleman walks by with his hat in his hand. His coat is buttoned, and his shoes are polished, as if he were still heading to dinner. He nods politely at you, then keeps going. He knows. You can see it in his eyes. But he's not running. He's just walking. And still, the band plays. The tune is slower now, sadder, but the musicians haven't stopped. One man's fingers are so cold, he can barely hold a bow. Still, he lifts it again and plays. And something about their quiet bravery makes your chest ache. A group of crewmen pass by, carrying more life vests. They're handing them out, urging people to take them to get to the boats. But some people refuse. Some still think they'll be safer here, on the ship, in the light, surrounded by walls and familiar things. The sea is terrifying. The night is worse. You find yourself standing near one of the funnels, feeling its warmth still lingering in the metal. It's one of the few places that still hold some heat. But even here, the chill is winning. The tilt is more obvious now. You have to brace yourself slightly as you move. The slope isn't extreme, but it's undeniable. The ship is sinking, and no one is saying it out loud. People use other words. Delay, precaution, inconvenience. But not sinking, never sinking. That word still feels forbidden. A mother near you begins crying softly. She holds her child tightly, whispering over and over that everything will be all right. Her voice is kind, steady, but her eyes are terrified. She's not sure if she believes herself. You hear someone shout from the lifeboat station, "This is the last one." And the panic rises again. People press forward. Others hold back, too frightened to push. You watch as a young woman hesitates at the edge. There's one seat left. A crew member reaches for her. She turns, looks behind her, searching. Then she pulls back. "My brother's not here yet," she says. And just like that, the boat lowers without her. No one speaks. The ropes creak as the boat descends. The silence grows heavier. You think about that girl, whether she'll find him, whether either of them will survive now. But you don't have time to finish the thought, because then a sound, a deep, rumbling groan from the bowels of the ship, metal bending, screaming, a sound you'll never forget. The ship lurches, just for a moment, but it's enough. People scream. Plates slide from tables inside. A lantern crashes to the floor and shatters. You hear running, heavy footsteps, shouts. It's going. She's going. More people scramble toward the stern, toward higher ground. Others freeze. One man collapses, clutching his chest. Two officers try to guide the crowd, but no one's listening anymore. The sea is creeping up, reaching for you. You run. Not fast, not like a hero in a movie. You run like someone who's been freezing for hours, like someone whose legs don't move quite right anymore. You stumble. You keep going. The incline is worse now. Your hands grab the railing as you climb, struggling to stay balanced. The deck isn't flat anymore. It's a hill, and the water is following. When you finally reach the stern, the view takes your breath away. The bow is deep in the sea now. The first funnel is nearly touching the water. The lights down there flicker, then go dark. Sparks fly. You hear another groan, deeper, louder, like the ship is in pain. You brace yourself against the railing, heart pounding. Behind you, people are climbing too. Some cry, some pray, some stare blankly at the horizon. And still, no rescue ship, no flare, no sign of anyone coming. The Titanic is alone. You look down at the lifeboats, bobbing in the dark. Tiny shapes, full of people. So far away now. You wonder if they can see what's happening, if they know how bad it's gotten, or if they're too afraid to look back. The ship trembles again. The stern lifts higher. And for a brief, surreal moment, you feel weightless. Just for a second, the deck beneath you shudders. You grab the railing and hold on. The groaning metal below seems to scream now. And that's when you know there's no more time. You don't remember how you ended up sitting. Maybe your legs gave out. Maybe your mind just gave in. Either way, the cold of the wooden deck seeps into you as you sit there, back against a coil of rope, clutching the railing like it's the only thing holding you to the world. The stars above are still as bright as ever, crisp and scattered like diamonds. But now the beauty of the sky feels cruel, too calm for what's happening below it. The ocean has taken on a different sound, less distant, more present. You can hear it lapping at the sides of the ship, greedy and cold. More people have gathered at the stern, not running anymore, just there, breathing, existing, silent. The panic has worn down into stillness. Even fear, after a while, becomes something quieter. A man crouches near you, clutching a pocket watch. He stares at it like he expects it to change, like it can somehow tell him what happens next. He winds it, clicks it closed, then opens it again. Click, open, click, over and over. Another man beside him lights a cigarette with shaking hands. He offers you one without looking up. You shake your head. He shrugs, as if to say, figured. But it was worth the offer. Somewhere nearby, someone is humming. It's off-key but gentle, a tune you don't recognize. It drifts over the wind like smoke. Time stretches. The ship groans again, and this time the sound carries through your body. You feel it in your ribs like thunder. And then something changes. There's a snap, a shudder, and movement. The deck beneath you shifts so suddenly that you scramble to hold on. People scream. Not many. Just enough to let you know you're not imagining it. The stern lifts. Not a little. A lot. Suddenly you're angled so sharply that things begin to slide. Blankets, cups, luggage, shoes. A deck chair tips and tumbles toward the rail. Someone grabs onto a light post. Someone else loses their grip and begins to slide, but they're caught, pulled back by another passenger. The bow, you can't see it anymore. It's gone beneath the water, swallowed, and with it, everything familiar. You hear someone shouting, she's breaking, she's splitting in two, and for a moment, you think that can't be possible. Ships don't break like that. But then you feel it, deep, cracking, violent. Like the earth itself is tearing. The sounds are unbearable. Metal screaming, wood splintering, a force you can't see but can feel in your teeth, in your spine, in the air. And then it stops. Like the ship itself took one final breath and exhaled. There's no time to process. No time to understand. Water. It's rushing up again. This time faster. You get to your feet. Not easily. You almost fall. Your legs shake. But you stand. People are jumping now. Some don't think. Some don't hesitate. Others hang at the edge, frozen by choice. A few make the leap. A few land hard, and the sound is haunting. And then the water takes them. The cold hits you harder than you thought it could. Not just outside, but inside. The kind that chokes the air out of your lungs. You didn't even jump. You just got too close, too slow. The rising water met you where you stood. And now you're in it. You try to keep your head up. Try to swim. But your body isn't working the way it should. The life vest helps, but the freezing temperature robs you of movement, of clarity. You hear voices. So many voices. Crying out. Shouting names. Begging for help. Some are calling for mothers. Others for God. One man just keeps repeating the same name. Lucy. 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 You can't see anything anymore. Only the sky above. The stars. You float barely. Your fingers are numb. Your thoughts start to slow. You see the stern of the Titanic. Its massive black shape, now nearly vertical against the stars. For a moment, it's almost beautiful. Haunting. And then it too begins to sink. It goes slowly at first, then faster. It disappears beneath the surface with a rush that pulls everything toward it. Water folds over it like a curtain. And then it's gone. Completely. No ship. No music. Just the sea. And the screams. They go on for a long time. Louder than you expected. Human. Raw. Terrifying. They don't stop all at once. They fade. Slowly. Like the flickering lights had earlier. One voice here. Then another. Then another. Until there's nothing. Just the sound of the sea. And breathing. You're breathing. It's shallow. Unsteady. Your lips are shaking. You try to whisper something, but you don't know what. And that's when you realize something else. It's not over. You're still here. Still in the water. Still waiting. You scan the horizon, hoping to see something. A light. A boat. Anything. But the dark stretches on and on. Endless. Time passes. You don't know how much. The stars don't move. Your breath is slower now. Your limbs feel heavier. Somewhere inside you, a small part of your brain says, sleep would feel good right now. Just let go. But then you hear it. A faint splash. Then another. Then a voice. You can't believe it at first. You think it's your imagination. But then you see it. A silhouette. A lifeboat. Oars dipping quietly into the black. They've come back. Not all of them. Just one. A handful of people inside, pulling others from the water. Quietly. Desperately. Their faces look like ghosts in the starlight. You try to call out. Your voice is hoarse. Barely there. You wave an arm, but your muscles barely respond. Still, they see you. They row closer. And for the first time, you let yourself hope. Just a little. Their hands reach for you. Ruffle sleeves. Cold fingers. You're pulled into the boat. Not gently, not smoothly, but safely. You collapse into the bottom, against a bundle of wet coats. Someone covers you with a blanket. Another hand squeezes yours. No one says much. The boat is silent except for breath and the occasional quiet sob. You lie still, chest heaving, feeling the shape of the waves beneath you. Feeling the deep hum of silence after disaster. You are alive, but the night is far from over. The boat rocks gently now, the worst of the waves long behind it. You're lying on your side, head resting against someone's arm without even realizing it. Nobody minds. At this point, survival has stripped away all rules of personal space, all formalities. You're just people now, soaked, shivering, alive. The woman across from you hasn't moved in minutes. Her eyes are open, but distant. Her lips are pale. She's holding the hand of a young boy who's sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. You wonder where his parents are, then quickly stop wondering. Some answers hurt more than others. One man leans over the side of the boat, throwing up quietly. No one turns to look. It's the sort of thing you don't judge anymore. Someone whispers, "How many?" A low voice replies, "Too many." No one asks again. You don't know how long it's been since you were pulled from the water. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. The sky still looks the same, white and black, dotted with those perfect little stars. You never noticed how quiet the ocean can be once everything stops moving. You lie still and listen to the oars dipping in and out of the water. There's a slow rhythm to it, almost like breathing. Dip, pull. Dip, pull. One of the crew members rows without looking up, his arms moving automatically. He's done this before, maybe, but never like this. There's a smell in the air, salt, smoke cold. Maybe it's the damp wool, maybe it's fear. It clings to everything. It will stay in your clothes for days. It will stay in your memory forever. Your body is starting to feel again, first with pins and needles in your hands, then a strange aching in your legs. You're alive, but your body isn't happy about it. Your thoughts are clearer now, but you almost miss the fog. Clarity brings questions. Where are we going? Will they find us? What if they don't? A man near the front speaks to the crew quietly. You catch a few words. Carpathia. Hours. Sunrise. Someone whispers, "If we make it to dawn." But they don't finish the sentence. You close your eyes, even though you're not sleeping. Your body is too cold to relax. But the darkness helps. It's easier to pretend this is all a dream, or something far away, something you heard about once. The sound of the water changes again, slightly. Just enough to notice. The boat slows. You open your eyes. Ahead, in the distance, there's a light. Faint, small, but real. You can't be sure, but you think it's another lifeboat. Someone sees it too and points. Another person sits up straighter. There's a murmur of hope, soft and cautious. As your boat approaches, you see that the other lifeboat is full, just like yours. People sit huddled, their shapes barely visible. A woman waves. A man shouts something you can't hear. Your boats don't join, but they drift side by side for a while, moving together like lost siblings in the dark. You don't speak. You just float. Together. Eventually, their boat drifts behind yours again, swallowed slowly by the darkness. But the sight of them lingers, proof that someone else made it. That not everything was lost. The crew member at the back says something again. We keep heading toward the flares. Flares? You lift your head. Now you see them. Faint bursts of red and white light far off in the distance. Not from your boat. Not from any boat. From a ship. A big one. The rescue ship. The word rolls through your mind like a tide. Rescue. It's not over yet, but something has shifted. You're not drifting aimlessly anymore. You're going somewhere. Toward someone. Toward something solid. The others see the light too. Hope returns, quiet and unsure, like a bird testing the air before it flies. A woman in the back starts crying. Not loudly. Just tears sliding down her face as she clutches her scarf tighter. Next to her, a man bows his head and whispers what might be a prayer. One of the crew points to the horizon. She's steaming toward us. The words don't quite feel real, but they help. You're not going to freeze out here. Not all of you. Someone saw the flares. Someone heard the distress call. And they're coming. It won't be quick. The sea is still cold. The hours are still long. But the difference between being lost and being found is sometimes only one spark in the distance. You lie back down, feeling the wooden slats of the lifeboat pressing into your spine. The stars are beginning to fade. Not much, but just enough. The blackness above is thinning into deep blue. Morning is coming. And somehow, so are you. You listen again to the silence around you. This time it's not fear. It's survival. By the time the sun begins to edge over the horizon, the chill in your bones is still there. But it's not quite so sharp anymore. Maybe it's because your body has adjusted, or maybe it's because the orange light creeping into the sky reminds you that the worst of the night is behind you. Either way, when you glance around the boat, something is different. The people don't look any warmer, but they seem more alive. There's a child now, barely 4 years old, asking softly where the ship went. His mother, eyes red from cold and crying, wraps her arms around him and says, "It sank, sweetheart." But we didn't. She doesn't try to say more than that. She just holds him close and rocks back and forth. That simple rhythm, steady and sure, makes something inside you ache. You look back out over the ocean and realize just how empty it all is. The wreck is long gone beneath the surface. No sounds, no debris, just an endless sweep of sea that could make anyone feel small. The great ship that had once felt like an invincible palace now sleeps under thousands of feet of water. All those chandeliers and carpets and gold-rimmed menus mean nothing out here. What mattered, what still matters, is who made it. The rescue ship finally comes into view. RMS Carpathia. It's not a blur of light anymore, not just a distant hope. It's real now, black steel, tall masts, smoke drifting gently from its funnels. It's a lifeline. It's everything. The people in your boat begin to move again. Some sit up straighter. Some whisper prayers. Others just stare at the ship, too tired for words. "Hold tight," one of the crew calls out. "We're close." As you approach, you see figures lined up along the railings, peering down at your boat. They look shocked, pale. Some are calling to each other. Some are throwing down ropes. The Carpathia is already full of survivors. The air smells different now. Engine smoke, oil, warm iron. You didn't realize how deeply you missed it. A ladder is lowered. One by one, people begin to climb. Your legs barely work. Every muscle in your body protests. But you follow them up. A hand reaches down and grabs yours. You cling to it like it's the last real thing in the world. When you finally step onto the Carpathia's deck, it takes you a moment to believe that it's solid. Real. You're no longer floating. There are blankets. Hot drinks. A woman presses a cup of something warm into your hand and guides you toward a bench. You sit down, shivering violently now that your body is thawing. The cup rattles against your teeth, but you drink it anyway. Tea. Sweet. Hot. The best thing you've ever tasted. A man next to you stares ahead blankly. He's wrapped in 2 blankets, but he hasn't blinked in minutes. Someone sits beside him and offers a biscuit. He doesn't take it. The deck is filling quickly. Lifeboat after lifeboat is being hoisted up, emptied, and lowered again. It's methodical, quiet. There are no cheers, just the low sounds of voices, the shuffle of boots, the creak of ropes. You spot a familiar face across the way, a man who had helped lift you out of the freezing water. He's talking softly to a girl, maybe 14 years old, who's trembling but alert. He says something that makes her nod. Just a nod, but it's something. Eventually, Someone comes by with a clipboard and asks for your name. You tell them. They ask if you were traveling alone. You shake your head. But when they ask who you were with, your voice catches. You hesitate. You don't know how to answer. The officer waits, pen hovering. But when he sees your eyes, he doesn't press. He just nods, writes something down, and moves on. You're led inside the ship, into a cramped but warm lounge area filled with others. Some sit in silence. Others huddle together, whispering. A few are trying to sleep, curled up on benches, their shoes still wet. There's a strange hush here. Not grief, exactly. Not yet. It hasn't had time to settle in. It's more like shock wearing a tired face. People are too exhausted to process it all. They just breathe. Just sit. Just survive. You find a spot on the floor, leaning against the wall, blanket pulled tight around you. There's nothing to do now but wait. The Carpathia is heading to New York. That much you know. But what waits for you there is impossible to imagine. All the plans you had for the future, where you were going, what you hoped to see, are meaningless now. Your life has split in two. Before the iceberg, after the sinking, and you're not sure what comes next. Across from you, a young man stares at the floor, his lips moving silently. You realize he's counting. Maybe names, maybe prayers. You don't interrupt. We all have our ways of coping. Time passes strangely. You're not sure how long you've been sitting there when the door opens and a crew member steps in. He looks around, a paper in his hand. We've confirmed, he says quietly. More boats found. Survivors still coming aboard. Someone lets out a shaky breath. Someone else begins to cry. You feel something twist in your chest. Relief. And guilt. Always guilt. Because not everyone made it. You think of the people who were still on board when the ship tilted upward. The ones who had no chance. The musicians who played until the end. The engineers who stayed below deck trying to slow the flood. The third-class families locked in chaos, running for exits that never came. And the man who gave you his place in the boat. You never even knew his name. The ship shudders gently beneath you as it picks up speed. The Carpathia is heading west now, cutting through the waves. But in your mind, part of you is still drifting in that lifeboat, still watching the flares, still listening to the cries that echoed over the cold water and slowly faded. Somewhere deep inside the ship, the engine rumbled softly like a heartbeat, steady and calm. You sat there wrapped in your damp blanket, eyes barely open, but the weight of everything that had happened clung to you like the cold still in your skin. Around you, the room was filled with people, but no one seemed quite present. Faces were turned downward, hands trembled slightly when cups of tea were lifted, and every now and then someone would stand up to pace, as if their bodies still hadn't adjusted to being alive. The girl next to you had barely spoken a word since boarding. Her name was Clara. At least, that's what someone had said when helping her into the boat, and she kept her fingers tightly laced around a ribbon. Just a simple thing, blue and fraying at the ends. She stared at it the way some people stare at gravestones. You thought about asking her who it belonged to, but you didn't. Everyone had something they'd lost that night. Everyone had something they were holding on to because it was the only piece left. A steward walked through the room again, softer this time, checking for names. He looked younger than you'd expect. Maybe 25. His eyes kept flicking toward the corners of the room, as if he, too, was expecting someone to appear who never would. He paused by a man who'd been coughing steadily since boarding. They spoke in hushed voices. The man shook his head. No one else. You heard him whisper, "Just me." You shifted a little, tried to stretch your legs. The floor was still cold beneath you, and the seams of your shoes had started to crack from the salt water. As you rubbed your palms together for warmth, your thoughts kept circling back to the beginning, before the ship, before the ocean swallowed the decks, back when everything was still hopeful. It felt like years ago. The Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a promise. That's how people talked about it. The newspapers called it unsinkable, and people believed them. Not because steel couldn't fail, but because hope was louder than logic. It wasn't just a way to get from Europe to America. It was a doorway, a passage into a new life, a new dream, something grander. For some, it meant starting over. For others, it was a chance to leave hardship behind and finally belong somewhere else. You remembered the first moment you saw it in Southampton. It towered over everything. The hull gleamed in the sunlight, its size so large it almost didn't look real. Children clung to their parents' coats and pointed at the smokestacks. Couples stood arm in arm on the docks. Everyone was dressed in their best, as if stepping onto that ship meant stepping into the future. And in a way it did, just not the future anyone imagined. The first few days on board had been quiet, peaceful. There was music at night, laughter in the dining halls, the clink of silverware against porcelain. In the third-class section where you stayed, things were simpler but still filled with life. Families sang songs in different languages. People shared meals, shared stories. You learn more about your bunkmates in 3 days than you had about some people back home in 3 years. You thought about the older couple across the corridor from your room. They were Hungarian, spoke only broken English, but they smiled every time they saw you. The woman always had a scarf on her head, tied neatly at the back. The man carried a worn Bible in his coat pocket. You hadn't seen either of them since the lifeboats were lowered. There was a man who played the violin each evening down the corridor. You never knew his name, but you remembered the way the sound carried through the narrow metal walls, soft and haunting. He played without asking for applause. Just played. You wondered if the ocean had taken that violin too. And the crew, so many of them just boys, really. Polite, fast-moving, doing their jobs, even when things started to go wrong. When the alarm sounded and the tilt of the ship became impossible to ignore, some of them didn't even pause. They just kept shouting instructions, trying to lower the boats, trying to hold the lines. You had seen one of them get hit with a falling or as chaos erupted on the starboard side. He went down, bleeding, but someone dragged him up and he was back helping minutes later. You hadn't thought about his face until now. You blinked and looked around the lounge again. A baby was crying softly now, the sound muffled by thick arms and thick blankets. Its mother rocked it gently, humming something tuneless. People nearby didn't even flinch. They just sat, staring out the small windows, eyes blank and heavy. That silence, that tired quiet, was the loudest thing of all. Eventually, one of the officers came through the room, murmuring updates. Still searching, he said to someone, "There may be more boats." The hope in his voice didn't sound convincing. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want to say what everyone already feared. That many of those left in the water never had a chance. Clara finally stirred beside you. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Do you think they'll find the others?" You turned slowly toward her, meeting her eyes. There was a shimmer of hope there. Or maybe just the need to believe in something good after so much loss. You didn't know what to say. "I don't know," you whispered. "I hope so." She looked down at the ribbon again. "It was my brother's," she said. "He tied it on my wrist before we got in the boat. He said it'd help me remember he was right behind me." You watched as her thumb brushed over the frayed edge. "I don't know if he made it," she added, barely audible now. "I didn't see him again." Your chest tightened. There were so many people with stories like hers. Half-finished goodbyes. Last-second promises. None of it felt fair. None of it ever would. And still, the ship moved forward, cutting through the ocean slowly, carefully, toward a city that had been expecting joy, not wreckage. New York was still days away, but already whispers were starting. People wondering what would happen when they got there. Would reporters swarm the docks? Would families be waiting? Would their names even be on the lists? And deeper than all of that, the questions no one dared ask out loud. What if the people they loved weren't listed at all? What if there was nothing left to explain? What if the story that waited on the shore was too heavy to carry? You leaned your head back against the wall and closed your eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. Just to feel something besides fear and salt water and the ache of memories that wouldn't stop unfolding. Somewhere, not far off, the violin started again. Not on the ship, of course, just in your mind. Faint, familiar, like a ghost returning to finish a song no one got to hear all the way through. And still, the Carpathia pressed on, into the misty morning, carrying the weight of 1,000 broken stories, none of them quite ready to end. The hum of the engines beneath your feet was the only constant sound, a low vibration that never changed, never paused, like the world gently reminding you it was still turning. You opened your eyes slowly. The dim light inside the lounge had shifted, just slightly, enough to tell you that dawn had found them. But there was no sunlight, only a dull gray that blurred the edges of the sea and sky, as if even the sun didn't know how to rise after what had happened. The people around you were beginning to stir. Some blinked away sleep, others sat upright suddenly, as if jolted awake by memories. The air inside the lounge felt warmer now, but still too heavy to breathe freely. You could hear soft voices exchanging names, asking about loved ones, repeating the same uncertain phrases. Did you see them? Were they in your boat? What was the last thing they said? The questions had no answers. Not yet. Maybe not ever. A nurse walked through the room now, handing out small cups of broth, something hot, something that didn't taste like seawater. You accepted one and cradled it between your hands, grateful for the warmth. It wasn't the taste that mattered. It was the act of holding something real, something you could count on. Clara had fallen asleep beside you at some point, her ribbon tucked under her chin like a child clinging to a toy. You didn't wake her. Let her dream, if dreams were even possible after what she'd seen. The nurse stopped beside you and asked softly, "Name?" You gave it. She nodded, marked something on a list, and said, "If you remember anyone else from your lifeboat, please tell us. We're trying to match families." You nodded back. "I'll try." But the truth was, everything was a blur. You remembered faces, hands pulling ropes, voices shouting in the dark. But names? Names had drowned in the same water as everything else. You sipped the broth slowly and stared across the room. There was a boy sitting by himself in the corner. You'd seen him earlier, but hadn't spoken to him. He couldn't have been older than 10. He was wearing a coat far too big for him. The sleeves swallowed his hands. His hair was still wet, and he was watching the window like he expected someone to knock on it. A woman walked past and paused beside him. She bent down, whispered something, and the boy just shook his head. She didn't press him. She just placed a hand on his shoulder and kept moving. You knew that look. The one he had. It was the look of someone who hadn't cried yet. Not because they were strong, but because they didn't know where to begin. Someone behind you started to speak about the iceberg. The words were low, cautious, as though saying the word too loudly would summon it again. It was like glass, the man was saying. No color, just a shape rising out of the dark. I didn't even believe it at first. Thought it was part of the sky. Others nearby nodded, murmured their agreement. I was on deck, someone else added. Felt the jolt, small but sharp, like hitting a curb in a motor car. Then the cold wind rushed up, and suddenly everything was different. You hadn't seen the iceberg yourself. By the time the alarm started and the crew began running, your cabin had already begun to shift under your feet. But hearing them talk about it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. There was something deeply unsettling about that. Knowing a mountain of ice could do this. That it could turn steel into ruin, shatter dreams mid-ocean, and not even leave a trace. As the ship continued its course, you realized more survivors were being brought in from other decks. Some of them were wrapped in heavier coats, others barefoot. You saw a woman being carried in on a stretcher, her lips blue, but her eyes open. She clutched something to her chest, but from her distance, you couldn't tell what. A voice near the door said quietly, "She lost her daughter." Someone else responded with a slow, "God help her." You couldn't look away. Maybe that's what all of this was now. An endless series of things you couldn't unsee. A man stepped forward with a notebook in his hand, one of the officers. He cleared his throat and said, "If you have any information on others from your lifeboat, please let us know. We're creating a passenger manifest, confirming who made it. Every detail helps." There was a pause. Then someone spoke. "I was in boat 7, a woman said, standing slowly. There was a young man, red hair, freckles. I think he was from Belfast. He helped lift people in, made sure the women were seated. I don't know his name, but he stayed behind when we launched. He wouldn't get in." The officer wrote quickly. Another woman added, "There was a mother with twins. One of the babies was sick. She had a scarf, bright yellow. I think she got into a later boat. Boat 12, maybe?" And so it went. One by one, people stood and shared fragments. Names, colors, faces, moments frozen in panic. Some of the stories were interrupted by emotion too thick to speak through. But still they tried. Everyone was trying to hold on to something, to honor those who hadn't made it. You wanted to speak. You opened your mouth once, then closed it. The words just weren't there yet. Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Are we still moving? You nodded gently. Yes, still heading for New York. She sat up straighter, rubbed her arms. Feels like it's been weeks. You looked out the window. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. That might have been the worst part. I don't think I'll ever feel warm again, she said suddenly, her voice breaking. You reached into your coat pocket, pulled out a handkerchief that had somehow stayed dry. You handed it to her. She smiled a little. It was the smallest thing, but in that moment, it felt important. The officer returned and walked past you again. He was still taking notes, still collecting the names and stories that would become history. Some of those names would appear in newspapers. Others would vanish between pages, lost in the enormity of it all. And still, the Carpathia moved forward. Somewhere out there, families were waiting for names, for confirmation, for the terrible silence that would follow if their loved ones weren't listed among the saved. You wondered what they would say when they heard. What you would say if asked to describe what happened. Would you speak of the lifeboats and the cold? Or would you speak of the man who stayed behind? The girl with the ribbon? The violinist whose final song no one remembered the name of? The truth was, none of it made sense yet. Not really. It was just a collection of moments stitched together by grief. But you were alive, and somehow, that meant you carried the story now, even if it wasn't finished, even if it never would be. The Carpathia pressed steadily through the cold Atlantic waters, carrying the weight of more than 1,000 lives, souls saved from the depths where the Titanic had slipped beneath the waves. Inside the ship's narrow corridors, the air was thick with exhaustion and disbelief. The survivors, huddled in groups or sitting alone, seemed caught in a strange limbo between relief and sorrow, between the life they had lost and the uncertain future ahead. You found yourself drawn to the quiet moments, the small gestures that whispered of resilience. Like the older man who quietly shared his last cigar with a boy who had no family left, or the mother who sang lullabies to children, trying to mend the cracks in their broken world. Yet, beneath these moments, a deeper tension pulsed. The questions that no one dared to voice hung in the air, heavier than any coat or blanket. Why hadn't the Titanic's crew acted faster? Why were there not enough lifeboats for everyone? How could a ship, celebrated as unsinkable, be so vulnerable? And most haunting of all, how had the iceberg managed to carve such devastation while the vast Atlantic seemed to offer no mercy? The answers would not come easily. They would emerge slowly, tangled with human error, hubris, and the cold realities of survival. In the makeshift hospital quarters aboard the Carpathia, you watched the medics tending to the injured. Some wounds were physical, frostbitten fingers, bruises from falling debris, but many were invisible. The kind that settled deep in the mind, a persistent ache of loss and shock. You saw it in the eyes of a young woman clutching a locket, in the hands of a father holding a child who no longer stirred. One nurse approached you quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should try to rest," she said gently. "The journey ahead will test all of us." You nodded, but sleep seemed impossible. The memories clung too tightly. Visions of the ship's grand halls suddenly flooding, the frantic scramble for a lifeboat, the haunting silence after the last scream faded into the night. Outside, the cold sea stretched endlessly, indifferent to human tragedy. The moon cast a pale glow on the waves, but the stars seemed reluctant to shine. It was as if the universe itself mourned what had been lost. Later, in the common area, you overheard a group of survivors debating what had gone wrong. Their voices carried a mix of anger and confusion. The officers ignored the warnings. One said bitterly, "There were messages about icebergs for hours." "Captain Smith did his best," another replied. "But the ship was moving too fast. He didn't want to delay the voyage." You stayed silent. The blame was easy to cast, but it didn't bring back those lost. It didn't warm the bodies frozen by the sea. A young man nearby, his clothes still damp and his eyes shadowed with grief, spoke quietly to a companion. "I was in third class," he said. "The stairwells were locked. We were trapped down there. I don't know why they did that." His words sent a chill through you. locked stairwells, barriers that meant the difference between life and death. The very ship that promised safety had become a prison. The conversation drifted to the lifeboats again. Some had left half empty, others were overcrowded. The protocols were unclear, the crew overwhelmed. You wondered about those decisions. Were they made out of fear, confusion, or something else? Later, a small group gathered to share stories of the moments before the disaster. You listened as a woman described the elegance of the dining room, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and then the shudder, the first hint of disaster. She spoke of how the music didn't stop right away, how the band kept playing to calm the passengers, their melodies floating over the chaos. There was a haunting bravery in that, a refusal to let fear silence hope. But as she spoke, the weight of what followed pressed down again. The scramble, the shouting, the desperate rush for lifeboats that were already in motion. You could almost hear the screech of the ship's metal as it tore through the iceberg, the water rushing in like a cold flood reclaiming what belonged to it. You found your gaze drawn again to the boy from before, the one with the oversized coat. He sat quietly in a corner, tracing patterns on the floor with his fingers. A man approached him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right, son?" The boy looked up slowly. His eyes held a sadness that seemed far beyond his years. "No," he said softly. The man nodded, understanding more than words could say. You realized then that survival was only the beginning. What came next, the healing, the telling of the story, was a journey all its own. As night deepened over the Carpathia, the ship hummed softly beneath you. Somewhere far ahead, New York awaited, a city that promised reunion, questions, and perhaps justice. But for now, you were suspended between two worlds, the nightmare left behind and the uncertain dawn ahead. And somewhere in the darkness, the ocean kept its secrets. What would be uncovered once the survivors set foot on solid ground? How would the world reckon with the tragedy? And what lessons would be learned, if any? The story was far from over, and the answers remained just out of reach. The early morning mist clung to the Carpathia's deck as survivors gathered in small clusters, some whispering names and memories, others staring blankly at the endless gray horizon. The air was thick with salt and sorrow, a heavy reminder that life had changed forever in the span of a few hours. You stepped outside, the cold air biting at your cheeks, the vastness of the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. It was hard to believe that just days ago, this same sea had swallowed the grandest ship the world had ever known. The sky was overcast, heavy with low clouds that seemed to press down on the water, muting colors and silencing sounds. The waves rolled gently beneath the ship's hull, an eerie calm after the storm of panic and chaos. The Carpathia was a lifeline now, carrying those lucky enough to escape, but with each passing mile, the memory of the Titanic grew more distant and yet more haunting. You watched as a group of men pulled together pieces of debris, fragments of wood, torn clothing, a broken suitcase, remnants of lives that had been interrupted in an instant. Their faces were grim, eyes haunted by the ghosts of what they had seen. It was as if the ocean had refused to give up all its secrets, leaving only shards behind. A steward approached, offering blankets and hot coffee to those on deck. You accepted the warmth gratefully, wrapping the rough fabric around your shoulders. The bitter taste of the coffee mingled with the salty breeze, a reminder that survival was now about small comforts, fragile and fleeting. Nearby, a woman sat quietly, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. You could tell by the way she held it, so carefully, so protectively, that it was precious beyond measure. A child, you guessed, perhaps one who had not yet fully understood what had happened. She caught your gaze and nodded softly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "He's the only one I have left," she whispered. "My husband didn't make it. Neither did my sister." The weight of her words settled over you like a shroud. In moments like this, words felt useless. The enormity of loss was impossible to capture in language. You moved slowly across the deck, drawn to the quiet corners where people sat alone or in pairs, lost in their own thoughts. An elderly man leaned heavily on his cane, staring out at the sea with a look of deep sadness. A young couple held hands tightly, seeking comfort in each other's presence. And then, beyond the railings, you saw it, the spot where the Titanic had gone down. The water was deceptively calm, hiding the vast darkness below where thousands have been claimed. The surface rippled gently, almost as if the ocean were breathing, mourning the lives it had taken. You thought about the ship itself, the engineering marvel, the unsinkable giant. How had it all gone so wrong? You had heard whispers about the speed the Titanic had been traveling, despite iceberg warnings. You had heard about the shortage of lifeboats, the locked gates that trapped passengers in certain sections. And you had heard about the bravery of some crew members and the failings of others. But the full story was still unfolding. The questions, the mysteries, the painful truths, all waiting to be uncovered. Later, in the ship's small library, a group of survivors had gathered, some reading newspapers, others sharing scraps of information from the radio. Headlines screamed about the tragedy, names of the missing and the saved, rumors, and speculation. One article caught your eye, a report from an eyewitness who had seen the Titanic strike the iceberg. The words were stark, simple, yet filled with a chilling clarity. The ship shook, the lights flickered, and then the great liner began to sink, its bow dipping beneath the waves. It was chaos, screams, prayers, and the relentless cold. You folded the paper carefully, feeling the cold sweat on your palms. The reality of what you had escaped was still too sharp, too raw. A voice interrupted your thoughts. It was the young boy from before, the one with the oversized coat. He approached timidly, clutching a small notebook. "Can I show you something?" he asked quietly. You nodded. He opened the notebook to a page filled with shaky handwriting and a simple drawing. A boat with people in it, the stars above, and a heart in the corner. "I wrote down the names of everyone in my lifeboat," he said. "I want to remember them all, so they don't disappear." His words struck a chord deep inside. Memory was a lifeline, a way to fight back against the darkness. You smiled softly, encouraging him to continue. He pointed to one name, a man who had helped him board the boat. "Mr. Collins. He stayed to make sure no one was left behind. I think he didn't make it." You nodded solemnly. The boy's eyes searched yours. "Do you think we'll ever really understand what happened?" You didn't have an answer. That night, the ship rocked gently beneath the stars. You lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the engines. The silence was strange, almost unnatural after the noise of the sinking. You thought about the future, about the families waiting in New York, the inquiries that would follow, the stories that would be told again and again. But beneath all that, you wondered, what if the real story was still hidden? What secrets had the Titanic taken with it into the depths? What lessons had been lost in the rush to move on? The ocean outside was vast and unforgiving, a reminder that some things might never be fully known. And as sleep finally claimed you, there was one thought that lingered, the haunting question of survival. Why had some lived while others had perished? What choices had sealed those fates? And could anyone truly be prepared to face the cold, the dark, and the unknown? The story was far from over, and the night held its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The morning sun broke weakly through the thick Atlantic fog as the Carpathia approached New York Harbor. The city's skyline rose in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the pale sky. For many of the survivors on board, it was a beacon of hope, a chance to rebuild, to find answers, to return to a world that had been forever changed. Yet, as you stood on the deck, the bright promise of land felt strangely distant, overshadowed by the haunting memories still fresh in every mind. The whispers among the survivors had grown louder. Rumors of what went wrong, who was to blame, and why so many lives were lost filled the cramped quarters and echoing halls. You found yourself drawn to those conversations, not for gossip, but because the human need to understand tragedy is as strong as the need to survive it. One evening, you sat with a group of men who had been part of the ship's crew, officers, engineers, and stewards who had escaped the sinking. Their faces were lined with exhaustion and guilt, but their voices were steady as they spoke of the ship's design and decisions made that fateful night. The Titanic was built for speed and luxury, one officer said, but it wasn't prepared for what it faced. We had warnings, ice reports, but the ship was running late, and the captain didn't want to slow down. Another chimed in. There were not enough lifeboats. Regulations were outdated. The ship could carry over 3,000 people, but only had lifeboats for about half that. You listened intently, the pieces falling into place like shards of a broken mirror. But what about the locked gates? You asked softly. I heard that some passengers couldn't escape because doors were locked. What? A steward shook his head. Third-class passengers were kept separated, mostly for security and class reasons. But it was a mistake. When the ship started to flood, many were trapped. It was chaos, and no one had prepared for that. The room fell quiet as the weight of those words settled in. You thought about the young man you had met earlier, who spoke of being trapped in third class, unable to find his way out. His survival felt like a fluke, a cruel twist of fate among so many who weren't so lucky. Later, you wandered the ship's deck again. The survivors were beginning to prepare for their arrival, gathering belongings and trying to compose themselves. You caught sight of the ship's captain, Arthur Rostron of the Carpathia, speaking quietly with his officers. His face was stern but kind, a man burdened by responsibility, yet proud of what they had done to rescue those in need. You approached him hesitantly, curious about the man who had steered his ship through the night to save hundreds. How did you manage to find the Titanic in such a vast ocean? You asked. He looked at you thoughtfully. We received the distress signals and immediately changed course. It was difficult. Icebergs everywhere, cold weather, darkness, but every second mattered. We pushed the Carpathia to its limits. And the survivors? You pressed gently. What do you think they need most right now? A chance to heal, he replied. To tell their stories. To make sure the world never forgets. His words struck a chord deep inside you. The story of the Titanic was not just about a ship sinking. It was about people, their hopes, their fears, and their courage. That night, as the Carpathia glided toward the harbor, the survivors gathered one last time on deck. The city lights twinkled ahead, but many faces remained somber, haunted by the memories of that night. You noticed the young boy again, holding his notebook tightly. He looked up at the stars, then back at the water. I want to understand, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Why happened? How could it have been stopped? You nodded, understanding the impossible weight of that question. The Titanic story was a tapestry of human error, engineering limits, and the unpredictable power of nature. It was a tale that would be examined for years to come, by investigators, historians, families, and survivors alike. But as the Carpathia pulled into port, you realized that the hardest part was only beginning. The world awaited the survivors' stories. Questions would be asked, and the search for answers would intensify. And somewhere beneath the waves, the Titanic rested, silent and dark, a haunting reminder of a night when human pride met the unforgiving sea. What truths would surface when the investigations began? How would the families cope with the loss? And could anyone truly be prepared for the lasting impact of this tragedy? The story was far from over, and the answers, for now, remained just out of reach. The city welcomed the Carpathia with a mix of relief and disbelief. As the survivors disembarked, the crowds pressed close, eyes wide with curiosity and sorrow. Reporters jostled for the best angles, while families hoped to catch a glimpse of their loved ones among the weary faces. But for many, the overwhelming question lingered. How could such a magnificent ship, deemed unsinkable, meet such a tragic fate? You found yourself walking alongside some of the survivors, their steps heavy, voices low as they recounted fragments of the night. One woman, clutching a faded photograph, told you how she had narrowly escaped the flooding, aided by a stranger who guided her through dark, twisting corridors. Her story was one of courage, but also of heartbreak. She lost her husband in the icy water, swept away before she could say goodbye. Nearby, a group of crew members gathered quietly, their expressions guarded. They spoke of the pressures that had weighed on them, orders from above to maintain speed, conflicting signals about icebergs, and the impossible task of evacuating thousands with limited resources. Some blamed the company's focus on prestige and profits, others the captain's decisions that night. But all seemed haunted by the question of whether different choices might have saved more lives. In the weeks that followed, inquiries began in earnest. You heard about the official investigations held in both the United States and Britain, where survivors were questioned in long, grueling sessions. Their testimonies revealed a complex web of errors and misjudgments, from delayed lifeboat deployment to the lack of proper communication between ships. But amid the facts and figures, the human stories shone through. Stories of fear, sacrifice, and sometimes terrible loss. One subplot emerged around the role of the wireless operators, whose frantic messages had saved lives by summoning help but had also been ignored or delayed. The operators, overwhelmed and exhausted, were hailed as heroes, yet some wondered if the wireless warnings could have prevented the disaster if they had been taken more seriously. Meanwhile, families of the missing grappled with grief and uncertainty. You met a father whose son had been a crew member, lost without a trace. His grief was raw, compounded by the fact that the ship had taken so many into the depths without ceremony or closure. This personal tragedy echoed across the city, weaving a silent thread of pain through every household touched by the Titanic. The social divide aboard the ship also came under scrutiny. First-class passengers had better access to lifeboats, often securing places before many in second and third class had a chance to escape. Stories surfaced of locked gates and barred passages that trapped lower-class passengers below decks. This harsh reality sparked debates about class and fairness, exposing the grim inequalities that had persisted even in the face of disaster. As the public demanded answers, you sensed a growing tension, not just between survivors and shipping companies, but within communities torn apart by differing narratives. Some viewed the tragedy as a failure of technology and human error, others as a harsh lesson about hubris and the limits of progress. Amid all this, you couldn't shake the feeling that the Titanic story held deeper mysteries. What had truly happened in those final hours? Were there untold acts of heroism or hidden failures waiting to come to light? And how would the world change after such a monumental loss? The sea, once a symbol of adventure and opportunity, now carried a darker meaning, of lives ended abruptly, dreams shattered, and secrets submerged beneath its waves. With every passing day, the shadows around the Titanic's sinking lengthened. Investigations would continue, and history would try to make sense of it all. But the full truth, complex, painful, and human, was still unfolding. And the story was far from over. The city buzzed with the aftermath of the Titanic tragedy, but beneath the surface, tensions simmered. As inquiries dragged on, a quiet battle began between those seeking truth and those desperate to protect reputations. Survivors returned to their homes changed, carrying invisible scars and unanswered questions that gnawed at their minds. You met a young woman who had been traveling in second class. She spoke softly about the chaos during the evacuation, the shouts, the panic, and how she had seen crew members prioritize first-class passengers. "I don't blame them," she said, "but it felt like some lives mattered less than others." Her words echoed the harsh realities many refused to confront. The Titanic was a floating symbol of class divisions that, in its final hours, spelled the difference between life and death for hundreds. The policies and practices aboard the ship had reinforced a cruel hierarchy, where wealth bought safety and privilege, while others were left to face the freezing Atlantic alone. This theme of inequality drew public outrage, fueling debates in newspapers and social clubs. You observed how the tragedy became more than a maritime disaster. It turned into a reflection of society itself, exposing uncomfortable truths about power, money, and human value. Meanwhile, investigations uncovered more unsettling facts. Lifeboat drills had been minimal or skipped altogether. Some crew members admitted they had never been properly trained for an emergency of this scale. There were reports that the ship's lookouts were not equipped with binoculars, a simple tool that might have helped spot icebergs sooner. You heard how this detail became a point of intense discussion during the hearings, raising questions about oversight and responsibility. In one particularly tense session, a surviving officer revealed how the wireless operators had been overwhelmed with personal messages from passengers, which distracted them from the critical ice warnings sent by nearby ships. It was a glimpse into how small lapses in communication could spiral into catastrophe. At the heart of these stories were the survivors themselves, each carrying their own piece of the puzzle. Some had escaped by luck, others by quick thinking or sheer will. You met a father who had managed to save his two young children by convincing a lifeboat crew to let them aboard moments before the ship's final plunge. His relief was palpable, but so was the guilt for those he had lost. And then there was the mysterious case of a man who claimed to have been locked in the lower decks, forced to break free through a small hatch to survive. His account stirred controversy. Some questioned its accuracy. Others felt it captured the desperation felt by so many trapped below. As these individual narratives unfolded, you began to see how the Titanic disaster wasn't just a story of a ship hitting an iceberg. It was a tangled web of human decisions, errors, and inequalities. The tragedy was as much about people as it was about steel and ice. Behind closed doors, powerful interests fought to shape the story. The White Star Line, owner of the Titanic, sought to minimize blame, highlighting the ship's advanced design and the crew's efforts to save lives. Shipping regulators faced criticism for outdated safety rules. Public pressure grew for stricter maritime laws, but for many, these words felt hollow against the backdrop of so much loss. Your thoughts often drifted back to the night of the sinking. How could so many lives have been saved if different choices had been made? If the lifeboats had been filled to capacity, if more heed had been paid to the iceberg warnings, if the social barriers on board hadn't sealed the fate of so many? You realized the Titanic disaster was not just about survival against nature's power, but survival against human failings, pride, greed, fear, and indifference. And yet, amid the sorrow and outrage, glimmers of hope appeared. Stories of selflessness emerged. Crew members who gave up their seats to strangers, passengers who comforted one another in the freezing dark, and strangers united by shared terror. These moments reminded you that even in the darkest hours, humanity could shine. But the deeper questions remained. Who was truly responsible? Would the victims' voices be heard? And how would this tragedy change the future of sea travel and society itself? As the inquiry hearings continued and the public sought closure, the Titanic's legacy took shape, not just as a disaster, but as a powerful lesson etched into history. The waves kept their secrets beneath the icy surface, but the human stories rose, demanding attention, understanding, and remembrance. And as the world waited for answers, you knew the full story was still unfolding, layer by layer, person by person, question by question. The journey to uncover truth was only beginning. The weeks turned into months, and the world still held its breath, waiting for answers that seemed just out of reach. The inquiries into the Titanic disaster intensified, their rooms crowded with witnesses whose voices carried the weight of that fateful night. You found yourself listening to testimony after testimony, each adding new layers of tension and mystery. The more you heard, the more tangled the web became. There was Captain Smith, a man whose reputation stood as tall as the ship he commanded. Some described him as a calm and experienced leader. Others suggested he had grown complacent, too confident in the ship's unsinkable design. You imagine the pressure he faced in those hours, knowing icebergs loomed nearby, yet ordered to maintain speed. How much blame should rest on his shoulders? Could he have done more to warn or prepare? The uncertainty gnawed at you. Then came the officers and crew, their faces weary but determined to tell their side of the story. One after another, they spoke of confusion and fear, of orders lost in the chaos and moments when panic broke through the discipline. You heard about the lifeboat drills that never happened, the lifeboats lowered half empty, and passengers turned away because of quotas. It was hard to imagine such disorganized desperation aboard a vessel so carefully engineered. Among the survivors' accounts, a few stood out, especially those describing the harrowing scramble below decks. Locked gates barred the passage of third-class passengers, many of whom found themselves trapped as water surged in. Some witnesses claimed the ship's crew intentionally blocked access, perhaps fearing disorder or theft. These allegations sent shockwaves through the inquiry and the public alike. How could such cruelty exist in the face of disaster? Outside the hearings, the media frenzy grew louder. Newspapers printed sensational headlines, some accusing the White Star Line of negligence, others questioning government oversight. Families of the lost clashed with officials who seemed eager to move on too quickly. You sensed a building storm, not just of grief, but of anger and demand for justice. One chilling detail added to the suspense: the wireless operator's role. Their heroic messages saved lives, but internal memos revealed that some warnings about the ice field were ignored or dismissed as irrelevant. Was it a matter of poor communication or something deeper, a failure to listen when it mattered most? The operators themselves remained haunted by the moments when help might have come sooner. As you dug deeper, stories of courage emerged from the dark as well. A steward who helped women and children into lifeboats, refusing to save himself. A wealthy passenger who gave up his place to a stranger. And countless acts of kindness in the face of freezing water and fading hope. These moments of humanity stood out against the cold metal and icy waves. Yet, tension thickened when rumors spread of a cover-up. Some believed that evidence was being suppressed to protect powerful interests, shipping companies, government officials, even high-ranking naval officers. Whispers of destroyed documents and silenced witnesses created an atmosphere thick with suspicion. You began to wonder if the full truth would ever emerge. The lives lost beneath the waves deserved answers, but it seemed that for every fact uncovered, more questions appeared. The iceberg itself, a monstrous wall of ice that had shattered the ship's hull, became almost a character in the story, a silent, deadly force that none could escape. You imagine the moment it scraped along the Titanic's side, the eerie sound of metal tearing, the rush of cold water flooding through corridors once filled with laughter and dreams. The clock was ticking both that night and now. As testimonies piled up, pressure mounted to find out what really happened before the Titanic disappeared forever into legend. You felt the weight of anticipation as the inquiries neared their climax. Would justice be served? Would the lessons be learned to prevent another tragedy? Or would the silence of the deep swallow the truth once again? The story was on the edge, the final pieces poised to fall, but the outcome still unknown. And in that space between what was and what might be, you could almost hear the whispers of those lost souls, urging the world to remember, to understand, and to never forget the night the Titanic sank. The tension in the air was almost suffocating as the final days of the Titanic inquiry approached. Every witness, every survivor, and every official seemed to carry a secret, a fragment of truth waiting to surface, or perhaps buried forever beneath layers of denial and fear. You sat quietly in the crowded hearing room, watching as testimony unfolded like a slow, agonizing dance. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, the kind that gnaws at your gut and makes you question everything you thought you knew. There was a moment that felt like a turning point. A young lookout named Frederick Fleet, the man who had first spotted the iceberg that doomed the Titanic, took the stand. His eyes were haunted, his hands trembling as he described that split second, the flash of white ice looming ahead, the frantic shout to warn the bridge. He spoke of how his warnings were passed along, but how little time there was to react. You could almost see the iceberg through his eyes, a monstrous wall of cold, indifferent ice that shattered dreams and lives alike. But it wasn't just nature's force that drew the spotlight. Fleet's testimony also raised uncomfortable questions about the decisions made on the bridge in those final moments. Why had the ship been traveling so fast through a known ice field? Why had the iceberg warnings not prompted greater caution? These questions echoed through the room and into the hearts of everyone listening. As the inquiry delved deeper, it became clear that behind the heroic stories of survival, there were darker shadows. Some survivors spoke quietly about being turned away from lifeboats, their pleas ignored. You heard one woman's trembling voice recount how she had begged for a place for her sister, only to be told, no more seats. The pain in her words was raw, a reminder that the tragedy was not just about the sinking ship, but about lives cut short by cold, hard choices. Another subplot that gripped the public was the story of the ship's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride. Their frantic efforts to send distress signals kept the hope alive for many, but you learned that their work was hindered by distractions. Some messages were delayed or lost, including crucial warnings from nearby ships. The operators themselves were exhausted, working long hours with little rest. Their sacrifice was unquestioned, but their struggle revealed how fragile the line between disaster and rescue truly was. At the heart of the growing conflict was the White Star Line. The company's representatives defended the Titanic's design and safety measures, arguing that no ship could have survived such an unexpected strike. But survivors and investigators pushed back, pointing out flaws in the ship's bulkheads and the insufficient number of lifeboats. The lifeboats, you realized, were not even enough to carry half the passengers on board. How could a ship hailed as unsinkable be so unprepared for a disaster? Amidst the arguments and testimonies, rumors of cover-ups and suppressed evidence began to surface. Whispers spread about destroyed logs, missing documents, and officials urging witnesses to keep quiet. Some accused the White Star Line of prioritizing profits and reputation over human lives. The tension between truth and power was mounting, and you felt the weight of it all pressing down, making the room feel smaller, the stakes higher. Your mind kept returning to the personal stories of those who had faced death that night. A young man who had survived by clinging to a piece of debris for hours, his skin nearly frozen, yet alive because of sheer will. An elderly couple who chose to stay together on the sinking ship, their hands clasped as the water rose. These human moments added layers of complexity to the tragedy, reminding you that the Titanic was not just steel and machinery, but a collection of lives with hopes, fears, and memories. Outside the inquiry rooms, the public's reaction was mixed. Some demanded justice and reforms, while others struggled to accept the horror. Memorials were held in cities across the world, candles flickering in the night to honor the lost. The Titanic became more than a news story. It became a symbol of human frailty and the consequences of hubris. As the hearings moved closer to their conclusion, new revelations kept the suspense alive. Testimonies conflicted, evidence contradicted, and the search for a clear narrative seemed almost impossible. You watched as the inquiry struggled to piece together the truth from fragments of memory, testimony, and sometimes outright denial. Then came a breakthrough moment. An engineer who had worked on the ship's design revealed that the bulkheads, those supposed barriers against flooding, were not built to the height originally planned. They ended short, allowing water to spill over into adjacent compartments faster than anyone anticipated. This small detail, overlooked or perhaps dismissed, became a symbol of larger failures. Corners cut, warnings ignored, and assumptions made without enough caution. The more you learned, the more the Titanic disaster felt like a tragedy not just of nature, but of human error and neglect. It was a story of pride blinding judgment, of social divisions deciding who lived and who died, and of a world on the brink of change, forced to confront its own vulnerabilities. And yet, the most intense moment was still ahead. As the inquiry prepared to close, with final statements and recommendations looming, you sensed that the real test was about to come. Would those in power accept responsibility? Would the lessons learned here change the future? Or would the Titanic story be swallowed by silence and forgotten as just another chapter in history? The answers hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. The iceberg that had torn through the ship's hull was gone beneath the waves, but its impact rippled through time, touching every life it had affected. You felt the suspense building to a crescendo, the weight of untold stories pressing close. The Titanic's legacy was on the brink of being written forever, and the world waited, with bated breath, for the truth to emerge from the depths. What would come next? How would justice, if it came at all, reshape the memory of that cold April night? And how many more secrets remained buried beneath the ocean's dark surface? The story was poised on the edge, ready to reveal its final, most powerful chapters, but the resolution was still just out of reach. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a vast abyss. Every new detail brought fresh unease, and every testimony added another layer of complexity. The Titanic inquiry had become more than just a search for facts. It was a battle between accountability and evasion, between human error and forces beyond control. You could sense how deeply this struggle affected everyone involved, especially the families who sat quietly in the gallery, hoping for some measure of justice for the loved ones they lost. The social divide aboard the Titanic had become a central theme. First-class passengers, accustomed to luxury and comfort, had much better chances of survival than those in steerage or third class. You heard heartbreaking stories of families separated by locked gates and language barriers, of immigrants who had paid everything they owned for a chance at a new life, only to be trapped below decks as chaos unfolded above them. The disparity in survival rates was staggering, and it forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality and human worth. In the inquiry room, voices rose and fell as survivors from every class shared their memories. Some told of cold calculation, crew members directing women and children to lifeboats, men stepping back and giving their places away. Others spoke of panic and confusion, lifeboats lower half empty because no one knew how to fill them quickly, or because officers feared overloading. You could feel the tension building as the stories clashed and overlapped, each adding a new angle to the mystery. One of the most gripping testimonies came from a steward who had been working in third class. His account painted a grim picture of the locked gates and barred passages that trapped many passengers below deck. He described desperate attempts to break through doors, the cries of children and mothers, and the cold water rising rapidly. The committee members listened intently, their faces hardening. You knew this testimony would challenge the official narrative and push for real change in maritime safety. Meanwhile, the investigation turned a spotlight on the ship's design flaws. Naval architects and engineers gave detailed explanations of how the bulkheads were meant to contain flooding, but how in reality, water spilled over the tops as compartments filled. The ship's designers had hoped the bulkheads would keep the ship afloat long enough for rescue, but the miscalculation was fatal. You found yourself marveling at how such small oversights, like the height of a bulkhead, could make the difference between life and death. In the midst of all this, stories of heroism and tragedy continued to emerge. The band that played on the deck to calm passengers as the ship sank. The wireless operators who stayed at their posts until the very end, sending out distress calls. The quiet bravery of crew members who helped others on lifeboats, even as they faced their own doom. These stories reminded you that beneath the cold facts and figures, there was deep humanity, people doing their best in unimaginable circumstances. Outside the hearing rooms, public outrage was growing. Newspapers published scathing editorials, calling for stricter regulations and accountability. The idea that a ship could be called unsinkable and yet be so ill-prepared sparked anger across social classes and national borders. Politicians and industry leaders were forced to respond, promising reforms that would forever change how passenger ships were built and operated. Yet, amidst the fury and calls for justice, there were whispers that not all truths would be told. Some believed that powerful interests were working behind the scenes to protect themselves. You read accounts suggesting that certain documents had gone missing, that some witnesses had been pressured to soften their statements. The sense of a hidden story lurking beneath the surface added an almost eerie layer to the tragedy. The inquiry also revealed failures in communication that had worsened the disaster. The wireless distress signals were sent out in a world that was just beginning to understand the power of radio, and some nearby ships had not received the messages in time, or dismissed them as false alarms. The idea that rescue might have arrived sooner if technology had been used better was a bitter pill to swallow. As you absorbed these details, you couldn't help but reflect on the human cost. The Titanic was more than a maritime disaster. It was a story about lives interrupted, dreams lost, and the fragile nature of survival. The names of the victims and survivors echoed in your mind, their stories a stark reminder that history is not just dates and facts, but the lived experience of people. The closer the inquiry moved to its conclusion, the more the tension seemed to reach a breaking point. The committee had to balance finding fault with acknowledging the limits of human knowledge and technology at the time. The survivors, families, and the public demanded answers, but the path to those answers was tangled with politics, pride, and grief. Just when it seemed the inquiry might end with vague recommendations and half-promises, a new piece of evidence emerged. A testimony from a shipbuilder who admitted that the rush to finish the Titanic had led to compromises. Materials were substituted, safety drills skipped, and warnings overlooked to meet deadlines and keep costs down. This confession sent shockwaves through the proceedings, casting a new light on the disaster and reigniting calls for reform. You felt the suspense build, knowing that the final report would shape the future of maritime travel. Would it lead to real change, or be forgotten like so many tragedies before? Would the families of the lost find closure? Would the lessons learned from the Titanic stop such a catastrophe from happening again? The inquiry ended with many questions still unanswered, but the world had begun to wake up to the risks of modern life at sea. New laws were passed, ships were redesigned, and radio communications became mandatory on passenger vessels. Slowly, the legacy of the Titanic transformed from a symbol of human arrogance to a catalyst for safety and reform. And yet, as you close the final chapter of this story, you realize that the Titanic's mystery still held its grip. Beneath the waves in the cold, dark ocean lay the remains of a ship that had promised so much but delivered so much tragedy. The whispers of those who perished seemed to linger, urging us to remember, to learn, and to never forget the fragile line between safety and disaster. The story of the Titanic was not just about a ship that sank. It was about the world at a turning point, caught between the optimism of progress and the harsh realities of nature and human error. It was a story that still speaks to us in quiet moments when we think about how close we are to losing everything. What comes next in the tale is for you to discover. The ocean still holds its secrets, and the true impact of that night echoes far beyond the icy waves. As you drift into sleep, let these stories carry you gently, a reminder of the lives touched and the lessons learned. Because sometimes history isn't just a tale to stay awake for, but a lullaby that helps us rest and reflect on what it means to survive. Just when it seemed the Titanic tragedy had been thoroughly examined, a new revelation jolted the entire investigation, shifting the story into even darker waters. Months after the initial inquiry closed, an anonymous letter surfaced, sent to a prominent newspaper, claiming there was more to the disaster than just icebergs and poor safety measures. The letter hinted at a cover-up, suggesting that the Titanic's sinking was accelerated by decisions made far away from the frozen North Atlantic. This wasn't just about nature's cruelty or human error. It was a tale tangled with secrecy, power, and deliberate choices. The letter alleged that the ship had been carrying a secret cargo, something so valuable and controversial that certain parties were willing to risk lives and silence witnesses to protect it. This claim sent shockwaves through the public and reignited media frenzy. People who had already mourned and moved on found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the Titanic. What was this hidden cargo? Why was it so important? And how had it influenced the disaster that had claimed over 1,500 lives? Survivors and crew members were called back to testify, their memories dredged up and scrutinized once more. Some recalled strange activity in the cargo hold, heavy crates being loaded under tight security, guarded by men who didn't seem to belong to the ship's regular crew. Others mentioned unexplained delays before departure and unusual instructions from the highest levels of the White Star Line. As these accounts emerged, the Titanic transformed from a tragic accident into a complex web of intrigue. The investigation team faced mounting pressure. The more they dug, the more resistance they met from shipping officials and government agencies eager to bury the truth. Files went missing, witnesses fell silent, and subtle threats were whispered in corridors. It was clear that this was no ordinary maritime disaster. It was a story with stakes far beyond passenger safety and engineering flaws. Somewhere, beneath the surface, lay a secret powerful enough to alter history itself. Meanwhile, public interest shifted from sorrow to suspicion. Newspapers ran headlines filled with speculation about spies, illegal shipments, and corporate greed. The Titanic was no longer just a symbol of loss. It had become a mystery ripe with conspiracy. People debated late into the night, wondering if the unsinkable ship had been sabotaged or pushed into danger to protect a hidden agenda. The ocean held its silence, but on land, the storm of questions only grew fiercer. This second twist changed the way everyone viewed the disaster. It wasn't simply about survival anymore. It was about uncovering truth amid deception, about whether justice could be served when so many forces were aligned to keep secrets submerged. The Titanic story had become a puzzle with missing pieces, and the race to find them was on. As the inquiry reopened, investigators faced new challenges. The deeper they probed into the cargo manifests and shipping logs, the more discrepancies appeared. Official records showed no mention of the mysterious crates, but eyewitnesses insisted otherwise. The conflict between documented facts and human testimony created a gripping tension. Who was telling the truth, and who was hiding behind a veil of lies? The families of victims, already shattered by loss, found themselves caught in this renewed wave of uncertainty. For them, the promise of answers seemed as distant as ever. They longed not only for justice, but for closure, hoping that the shadows cast over their loved ones' deaths would finally be lifted. Yet, the more the investigation unfolded, the more it felt like a maze with no exit. The Titanic, once thought to be a straightforward tale of tragedy caused by an iceberg, was now a story layered with human ambition, hidden motives, and unanswered questions. Each new discovery raised the stakes, making the eventual truth harder to reach and more dangerous to reveal. The mystery deepened, pulling everyone, investigators, survivors, and the public, deeper into its grip. What secrets did the icy depths keep, and who would pay the price for uncovering them? The answers hung just out of reach, like the distant horizon on a stormy sea, promising to reshape everything once finally brought to light. The emergence of the anonymous letter transformed the Titanic tragedy from a story of human error and nature's wrath into something far darker and more complex. The idea that a secret cargo, hidden from public view, might have contributed to the sinking sent shockwaves through every corner of society. Suddenly, the focus wasn't just on who survived or why the ship sank. It was on what was being hidden beneath the surface, both literally and figuratively. Investigators scrambled to trace any clues related to this mysterious cargo. The official cargo manifests, meticulously kept and filed, showed nothing unusual. But eyewitnesses insisted they had seen locked crates being carried aboard, guarded by men in plain clothes who refused to identify themselves. Crew members who once had been willing to share their stories suddenly grew hesitant. Whispers spread that these men were connected to powerful interests who wanted to keep their secrets safe at any cost. The notion of a cover-up raised the stakes to an entirely new level. What could be so valuable or so dangerous that risking a ship and hundreds of lives was seen as acceptable? Some speculated it might be gold or precious gems. Others suggested political documents or even experimental technology. The era was one of great innovation and fierce competition between nations and corporations. Secrets could mean power, wealth, or even national security. Public fascination with the Titanic grew exponentially. The ship had already become a symbol of hubris, but now it was also a symbol of mystery and hidden agendas. Newspapers ran speculative stories about espionage, sabotage, and shadowy figures working behind the scenes. Families of victims, desperate for answers, found themselves caught between grief and suspicion, wondering if their loved ones had been sacrificed for reasons beyond their understanding. The inquiry, which had seemed to be winding down, was suddenly thrust back into the spotlight. New subpoenas were issued, and testimony sessions stretched on longer than anyone expected. Survivors were asked to recount every detail they could remember, especially regarding the cargo hold and any unusual activity. Some witnesses spoke of hushed conversations, locked doors, and men who carried themselves with an air of authority that went beyond the usual crew hierarchy. One particularly striking testimony came from a ship's carpenter who had worked below deck. He described how he was ordered to reinforce certain areas of the cargo hold at the last minute, without explanation. He recalled how the crates were sealed so tightly that even he was not allowed to inspect them. The sense of secrecy made him uneasy, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden, a feeling that would later prove to be more than just intuition. Meanwhile, the political atmosphere surrounding the inquiry grew tense. Government officials, shipping magnates, and naval experts all had stakes in how the story was told. There were pressures to downplay certain facts, to protect reputations, and to avoid public panic. Some in power feared that acknowledging a secret cargo and possible sabotage would shake confidence in maritime safety and disrupt international relations. Despite these obstacles, a small but determined group of investigators pushed forward. They followed leads that took them from London to New York, digging through warehouses, interviewing dockworkers, and piecing together fragments of evidence. Each new discovery deepened the mystery. A torn piece of cargo label, a ledger with suspicious entries, a witness who suddenly disappeared. At the same time, survivors struggled with their own memories and trauma. For many, the sinking was already a nightmare they wished to forget. But the reopening of the investigation forced them to relive those moments. The screams, the icy water, the desperate scramble for lifeboats. Some wrestled with guilt, wondering if they had missed signs or failed to act. Others questioned their own recollections, caught between clarity and confusion. The growing complexity of the Titanic story also highlighted the stark realities of class and privilege. The locked gates and segregated decks had trapped many passengers below. But what if the secret cargo had been stowed in the very areas where third-class passengers tried to escape? Could it be that human lives were weighed against hidden riches or covert missions? The thought was chilling. As tension built on land and at sea, the world watched with bated breath. The Titanic was no longer just a lost ship. It was a riddle wrapped in grief and intrigue. Every answer uncovered seemed to lead to more questions, and every revelation raised new suspicions. The line between fact and fiction blurred. It became clear that the true story of the Titanic was far from over. The second plot twist, the secret cargo and the cover-up, had escalated the conflict to new heights. It wasn't just about surviving an iceberg anymore. It was about surviving a web of lies, hidden agendas, and human ambition. And as the inquiry delved deeper, it became apparent that the sinking of the Titanic was a turning point, not only in maritime history, but in how society confronted the costs of progress and secrecy. The mystery remained unsolved, the truth submerged beneath layers of silence and deception. Yet the hunger for answers kept growing, fueled by the voices of those who had survived and those who sought justice for the dead. The Titanic's legacy was no longer just about tragedy. It was about uncovering the hidden forces that shaped that fateful night and the consequences that would ripple through history. What lay ahead was uncertain. The investigation had opened a door to dark corridors filled with danger and uncertainty. For those involved, the search for truth was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was a race against time, power, and silence. And the ocean, vast and cold, held its secrets close, waiting for the moment when they would finally come to light. As the story moved toward its climax, the stakes had never been higher. The Titanic was not just a shipwreck at the bottom of the Atlantic. It was a symbol of human vulnerability, ambition, and the eternal struggle to uncover what lies beneath the surface. The next chapter promised answers, but at what cost? The deeper the investigators dug, the more tangled the web became. The revelation of a secret cargo had cracked open a Pandora's box, and what poured out was far more unsettling than anyone had anticipated. Witnesses came forward with stories that hinted not just at hidden crates, but at a covert operation involving some of the most powerful figures in business and government. The Titanic was no longer just a passenger ship. It was a moving vault, a secret courier on the high seas. Some of the cargo's rumored contents were bizarre enough to fuel wild speculation. There were whispers of stolen artworks, priceless artifacts from private collections, and crates filled with documents that could destabilize entire governments if made public. Others spoke of experimental weapons or cutting-edge technology, possibly smuggled to avoid international scrutiny. The uncertainty about what exactly had been on board only deepened the mystery and the danger. Amid this swirl of rumors, certain names began to surface repeatedly. Shipping magnates who stood to lose fortunes if the truth came out, politicians with shady ties, and intelligence operatives who operated in shadows. The Titanic's sinking, some argued, was no accident. It was a cover-up, a tragic event orchestrated to protect interests far beyond the ship itself. If this was true, then the loss of life was not only heartbreaking but horrifyingly calculated. The pressure on the inquiry intensified. Official proceedings turned into a battleground of conflicting testimonies, hidden agendas, and veiled threats. Some witnesses recanted their statements or disappeared entirely. Investigators found themselves followed and warned to drop certain lines of questioning. It was a tense game of cat and mouse, with the stakes growing ever higher. Meanwhile, survivors faced a new kind of ordeal. Their trauma was reignited by the relentless spotlight, and their memories dissected and questioned. Families struggled with the burden of uncertainty. Had their loved ones died because of an iceberg or because they were caught in a dangerous secret? The emotional toll was staggering, adding another layer of tragedy to an already devastating story. The public, too, was gripped by a mixture of fascination and fear. Newspapers were filled with sensational headlines, speculating about spies, sabotage, and shadowy conspiracies. Some readers clung to the old story of the iceberg, unwilling to believe the new narrative. Others demanded answers, justice, and accountability. The Titanic had become a mirror reflecting society's deepest anxieties about progress, power, and truth. One particularly chilling account came from a former dock worker who claimed to have overheard a conversation between men unloading cargo in the days before the Titanic's departure. He described crates marked with strange symbols, guarded by men who spoke in hushed tones about ensuring the cargo's safe passage at all costs. The worker's testimony hinted at a readiness to do whatever was necessary to keep the contents secret, whether that meant bribery, intimidation, or worse. As the inquiry continued, subtle cracks appeared in the official story. The timeline of the Titanic's departure en route seemed increasingly inconsistent with documented radio messages and logs. Some believed the ship's course had been altered deliberately, steering it into a dangerous zone. If so, who had given the orders and why? The mystery deepened as each question led to more questions. Beyond the immediate tragedy, the Titanic disaster exposed wider issues about the era's rapid technological advancement and social inequalities. The ship was a marvel of engineering, touted as unsinkable. Yet was also a floating symbol of class divisions, with luxurious first-class accommodations sharply contrasted against cramped third-class quarters. The tragedy hit the lower classes hardest, many of whom were trapped below decks and denied access to lifeboats. But what if the secret cargo had been stowed in those lower decks, hidden from the eyes of first-class passengers and officers alike? The thought was disturbing. Human lives weighed against something unknown but clearly of great value. The intersection of class, secrecy, and survival became a stark theme. making the Titanic disaster not just a maritime tragedy, but a human one. Amid all this, the investigators found themselves in a race against time. Evidence was disappearing, witnesses were vanishing, and political pressure was mounting. The ocean depths held the remains of the Titanic and its secrets. But what if the truth would never surface? The fear was that the disaster would become a legend, not just of loss, but of silence and suppression. The story of the Titanic had shifted from a cautionary tale about hubris and nature to a gripping mystery about power, secrecy, and survival. Every new lead was a double-edged sword, bringing hope of answers but also danger. The ocean, vast and cold, seemed to guard its secrets jealously. As the inquiry moved toward its climax, the tension was palpable. The public waited, the survivors hoped for closure, and the investigators pursued the truth with relentless determination. But one question remained. Would the truth, once revealed, change everything we thought we knew about the Titanic? Or would it remain forever lost beneath the waves, another mystery swallowed by the deep? The answers were close, yet just out of reach, promising to rewrite history, or keep the truth forever submerged. As the final days of the investigation approached, a fragile calm settled over the tense atmosphere. But beneath it, the pressure was mounting like the storm before a crash. The pieces of the puzzle, scattered and elusive for so long, began to snap together in a startling way. The secret cargo, the mysterious course changes, and the shadowy figures all pointed to one chilling conclusion. The Titanic's fate was sealed by human hands, not just the cruel iceberg. The inquiry uncovered irrefutable proof that a covert shipment, one that could shake the foundations of power, had been aboard the ship. Documents surfaced, meticulously hidden, showing that the ship's captain had been given explicit orders to steer into a certain region of the Atlantic, where an accident would look like a tragic inevitability. The iceberg was the perfect scapegoat, a natural enemy that no one could blame. But behind the scenes, powerful men were pulling strings, ensuring the disaster would erase any trail of what was truly on board. Survivors' testimonies added depth to this grim reality. Some passengers recalled odd behavior from crew members, furtive conversations, locked doors, and hurried efforts to secure specific cargo. Lifeboats were not only insufficient because of oversight, but also deliberately misallocated. It was a brutal calculus. Some lives sacrificed to protect secrets worth millions, if not more. The public outcry was deafening. What had seemed like an act of fate was now a calculated betrayal, and the truth hit hard. Families of victims demanded justice. The world grappled with the notion that the Titanic's sinking was more than a tragedy. It was a crime. Investigators pushed further, uncovering a network of corruption involving high-ranking officials, shipping executives, and even intelligence operatives, all desperate to bury the truth. But just as the inquiry seemed poised to bring closure, an unexpected revelation struck, a second, more profound secret buried beneath the first. The cargo wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. Among the crates were experimental materials, volatile enough to cause catastrophic damage if mishandled. The sinking had been hastened, some argued, not only to hide smuggled goods, but to prevent an even greater disaster. This new information reframed everything. The iceberg was still an obstacle, but it was no longer the main cause. The Titanic had become a ticking time bomb, and those on board had been unwitting pawns in a deadly game. The bravery of the crew, the chaos of the evacuation, the desperate fight for survival, all were overshadowed by the knowledge that the ship itself carried a menace far beyond frozen water. As the investigators pieced together the final narrative, the weight of it settled on everyone. The Titanic was both a marvel and a nightmare, a floating fortress guarding secrets that men killed to protect. The disaster was a tragic collision of human greed, hubris, and fate, layered with secrets that challenged the very understanding of history. Then came a last twist, one that stunned even the most seasoned experts. Deep in the recovered ship's hull, a hidden compartment was found, an untouched safe containing a journal. Written by an anonymous crew member, It revealed the final act of defiance, a detailed confession describing efforts to warn others, to reveal the truth before the end. This crew member had sabotaged certain systems to delay the ship, hoping to buy time for rescue. But the attempt was too little, too late. The journal ended abruptly, with a note hinting that the real mastermind was still at large, orchestrating cover-ups from the shadows. The full story was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The Titanic's sinking was just one chapter in a larger saga of power, secrecy, and survival. As the inquiry closed, questions remained unanswered, and the story's true depth lingered in the minds of all who had followed it. The Titanic was no longer just a symbol of a bygone era, but a stark reminder. History often holds hidden depths, and sometimes the truth is far stranger and more dangerous than fiction. The ocean had finally given up some of its secrets, but many more were left beneath the waves, waiting for another day to emerge. You said, the discovery of the crew members' journal sent shockwaves through the entire investigation. This was not just a dry, official report, but a personal account, filled with fear, guilt, and a desperate hope that someone would understand the truth. The words painted a vivid picture of the final hours aboard the Titanic. Not only the chaos and terror, but the quiet acts of rebellion by those who knew the ship was more than just a luxury liner. As the pages were studied, the investigator in charge felt the weight of history press down on them. The crew member described the growing tension months before the voyage, the secret meetings in shadowed corners of the shipyard, the hushed warnings from dockworkers who had glimpsed suspicious crates marked with strange symbols. It was clear this person had been part of a small group within the crew who had been uneasy, even terrified, about what they were carrying. The journal revealed that the crew member had tried repeatedly to alert authorities on land, sending coded messages disguised as routine communications. Each time, those messages were ignored or intercepted. Powerful forces were clearly at work, suppressing any hint of the cargo's true nature. There was even a chilling reference to a mysterious Mr. Black, a shadowy figure who seemed to orchestrate these efforts from behind the scenes. As the Titanic sailed out of Southampton, the crew members' anxiety grew. The ship's altered course had been dictated by orders from above, but it was clear those orders were not for safety, but for secrecy. The journal spoke of quiet sabotage, efforts to slow the ship just enough to avoid detection while still maintaining the illusion of a smooth voyage. Lifeboats were reportedly moved and locked in ways that seemed designed to limit escape routes for certain passengers and crew. The final entries were the most heartbreaking. The crew member wrote of witnessing the iceberg collision, knowing that the ship was doomed not just because of the damage, but because of the cargo. The experimental materials in the hold were unstable. Any serious impact could ignite them, making the ship a floating bomb. That was why the evacuation was so chaotic. There was not enough time, not enough lifeboats, and too many hidden dangers below decks. In a desperate act, the crew member described trying to disable critical systems to slow the sinking and buy time for as many lives as possible. It was a quiet rebellion against the monstrous plan that had sent them all to sea. But the sabotage was only partially successful. The ship went down faster than anyone had hoped, and thousands of lives were lost. This personal testimony brought a new layer of tragedy to the Titanic story, a tale not just of a maritime disaster, but of a conspiracy that sacrificed human lives for secrets that should have never been on that ship. The inquiry's public statement shook the world. Officials acknowledged that the Titanic's sinking had been a cover for something far darker than an iceberg collision. While the precise nature of the cargo remained classified for now, the acknowledgement was enough to rewrite history and challenge the long-held myth of an unavoidable accident. Families of the victims found a bittersweet closure. The truth was painful, but knowing their loved ones had been caught in a larger, deliberate tragedy brought some relief. Survivors, too, spoke out with renewed voices, sharing memories that now made sense under this new light. Yet the final twist was still to come. As investigators prepared to close the case, a confidential tip arrived, an encrypted message from an unknown source claiming to have evidence that Mr. Black was not just a shadowy figure, but a code name for a powerful organization operating internationally. This group had orchestrated not only the Titanic disaster, but other events, using shipping routes and cargo to manipulate global politics. The message contained coordinates to an uncharted location in the Atlantic, rumored to be a secret facility related to the Titanic's hidden cargo. The implications were staggering. The Titanic's sinking was part of a much larger web of secrets, one that might explain unexplained disappearances and political upheavals around the world. The investigation reopened, this time with an international task force. Technology was brought to bear. Deep-sea exploration vehicles, satellite imaging, and cyberforensics all worked together to track down this new lead. The suspense grew. What was buried at that location? What more would be uncovered about Mr. Black and the shadowy network? As the exploration teams prepared to dive into the abyss, the world watched with bated breath. The Titanic story had evolved from a century-old tragedy into a modern-day thriller of secrets, power, and survival. The ocean, vast and mysterious, held the answers and possibly new dangers. The question remained, would the truth finally emerge, or would the depths keep their silence forever? And in the search for answers, would history itself be rewritten again? The legacy of the Titanic had transformed from a story of a ship lost at sea to a symbol of human secrets buried deep beneath the waves, waiting for the day someone brave enough would bring them to light. The deep-sea expedition to the secret location marked in the encrypted message was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The team of experts, divers, historians, scientists, and investigators descended into the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic, their every move watched by millions on land. As the submersibles reached the ocean floor, they uncovered a forgotten relic of the past, the remains of an underwater facility, eerily preserved and hidden beneath layers of sediment and time. Inside the ruins, among rusted machinery and broken crates, the team found more evidence of the Titanic's true mission. Documents sealed in waterproof containers revealed the nature of the experimental materials. Early attempts at advanced technology that, if exposed, could have shifted global power balances. The cargo was meant to remain a secret at all costs, explaining the drastic measures taken to hide it beneath the ocean waves. The story of the Titanic, once thought to be just about an iceberg and a tragic accident, had unfolded into a complex saga of greed, secrecy, and human cost. But as much as the investigation uncovered, some mysteries remained. The identity of Mr. Black was still uncertain, though clues suggested a network of influential figures spanning governments and corporations. Families and historians alike found some peace in knowing the truth behind the disaster. The lives lost were honored not just as victims of fate, but as innocent people caught in a much larger story, one of ambition and the shadows it casts. Survivors' stories, once lost in time, gained new meaning, reminding everyone of the courage and resilience shown amid chaos. Reflecting on the entire journey, it became clear that the Titanic's legacy was more than just a maritime tragedy. It was a lesson about human nature, the dangers of unchecked power, the cost of secrets, and the value of truth. The story showed how history is never simple, often layered with hidden motives and forgotten voices. The ocean, vast and mysterious, kept many secrets, but it also offered hope. Through perseverance and curiosity, humanity could shine light into the darkest depths, bringing clarity to stories long buried. The Titanic's tale, with all its twists and turns, was a powerful reminder that history is shaped not just by events, but by the stories we tell and the truths we seek. As the investigation officially closed, the world looked forward with a deeper understanding of the past and a cautious eye on the future. The Titanic was no longer just a ship lost to the sea. It was a symbol of the need for transparency, courage, and remembrance. And so, the story of why you wouldn't survive the Titanic was not just about cold waters or insufficient lifeboats. It was about the human stories beneath the surface, the secrets that shape destinies, and a lasting impact of uncovering truths long hidden. In remembering the Titanic, we honor those who lived, those who died, and the lessons that still ripple through time.